I was really surprised by Jake's behavior after my mom's funeral. Instead of offering condolences, he bluntly asked me about my mother's inheritance. I think he noticed me checking her passbook. Is the inheritance being transferred soon? How much is it? He asked eagerly. I told him it was around $600,000. He seemed disappointed and muttered to himself about how even after taxes, a lot would still be left. His strange grin made me uneasy. I decided I wouldn't let him control what happened with the money. The next day, I learned Jake was already making plans for the inheritance. But his naive schemes would backfire eventually, even if he didn't realize it. My name is Emma, and Jake is my husband. He's 5 years older and works for a company. We got married through an arranged marriage when I was 20. Jake is the oldest son in his family, and his younger brother, Robert, has been distant since graduating from university. So Jake practically grew up as an only child, and his parents doted on him a lot. To be honest, I never really wanted to marry Jake. My family has a long history in business, and as a privileged daughter, I couldn't go against my parents' wishes. Jake was also expected to take over his family's business. So we ended up together out of duty, not love. Our marriage wasn't happy by society's standards. We couldn't have children, despite trying fertility treatments, hoping it would make our lives better. In the beginning, my in-laws were kind, but over time they grew distant and started treating me poorly, calling me lazy and wasting money on medical treatments. My father-in-law would make sarcastic remarks daily, and Jake never stood up for me. He'd just read the newspaper or nap, seeming unconcerned. I wanted to work or leave the house, but Jake dismissed my ideas, saying our business was failing and I couldn't contribute. In those days, once a woman got married, she was expected to be a full-time housewife. Being alone with my mother-in-law was incredibly difficult. No one supported me. I couldn't tell my parents about my struggles, and because our marriage was arranged through work, I couldn't just leave. I held out to hope that things would improve and endured each day, but nothing changed over the years. After 20 years of marriage, when I was almost 40, my father-in-law died unexpectedly in an accident. It was then revealed that his company had been avoiding taxes, leading to bankruptcy and the loss of our wealth. Even the life insurance we had on him was gone. Our once prosperous life was just a memory, and I worried about Jake finding a new job at 45. Luckily, my parents helped him find work through their connections. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law aged rapidly and became physically frail, no longer able to criticize me. Eventually, she suffered a stroke and needed constant care. In this chaotic situation, I couldn't even think about getting pregnant at 40. I had already given up on that dream long ago. Jake, however, acted as if it were natural for me to take care of everything, lounging around on his days off. One day, I gathered the courage to ask him to help care for his mother on his days off, hoping it would lessen my burden. "Hey Jake, could you help with taking care of your mother on your days off?" I finally expressed my true feelings. I explained that if he could handle just one meal, it would make a huge difference for me. Jake's response was dismissive and selfish. He insisted that he needed to relax on his days off because he worked hard outside the home. He didn't understand the challenges I faced every day. My parents noticed my distress and urged me to come back home, but I couldn't leave my mother-in-law alone. We only had in-home care once a week, and the daily care she needed was too much for just me to handle. Despite being ridiculed and taken advantage of, I couldn't abandon my mother-in-law. Gradually, Jake started leaving early in the morning, even on his days off, seemingly uncomfortable under my watchful eye. He spread rumors to the neighbors, complaining that I criticized him for relaxing at home. Meanwhile, he enjoyed his free time alone while I took care of his mother. Everyone in the neighborhood knew she needed care, yet he acted as if he was doing nothing wrong by leaving it all to me. He didn't seem to care how he looked to others. My mother-in-law, who used to adore Jake, became depressed when she realized he wasn't helping with her care and kept his distance. I'd often received snide remarks about Jake's behavior, as if it were somehow my fault. The challenging life I had caring for my mother-in-law continued for 20 years until she passed away after my father-in-law's death. Now approaching 60, My feelings for Jake have faded, and I've accepted many things. It's hard to leave this house now, and I had imagined growing old here. Jake has worked tirelessly at his job, even after retiring, and continues to contribute as senior staff, which helps us financially. Despite our strained marriage, he hasn't shown any intention of kicking me out, though I doubt he thinks about it anymore. He often leaves the house on his days off, giving me some moments of freedom. Recently, I started a new hobby, pottery. I've made new friends and found happiness in these activities, but Jake disapproves. One day, he angrily burned all my pottery equipment and personal items in the yard, telling me to focus on housework instead. I was devastated by his actions. Although I had considered divorce, another tragedy struck when both my parents suddenly passed away. My brother William took over my father's business, leaving me deeply affected by the losses. The word divorce crossed my mind again, but I realized our journey ahead would be long and difficult. After the funerals, Jake seemed a bit better for about a week, likely mentally exhausted. My pottery friends expressed concern, but Jake sarcastically questioned why I was still in bed grieving, comparing it to his own reaction when his mother passed. While what he said might have some truth, it was hurtful to hear from a grieving wife. The next day, I forced myself to resume my normal routine, though I knew it would take time before I could enjoy my hobbies again. Jake appeared satisfied that things were back to normal. Sometime after my mother's funeral, I remembered the payment deadline for the funeral expenses and was checking my bank book. William was busy with work, so I was handling the financial arrangements. Jacob approached me with a smug grin as he noticed me looking at the bank book. "How much inheritance did you get from your mother?" he asked, without offering any comfort since the funeral. His insensitivity shocked me. While he probably assumed I was checking the inheritance amount, his lack of empathy was too much. I replied, "I received about $600,000, I think." $600,000? That's less than I thought, but even after taxes, a few $100,000 should still remain, huh? Jake mumbled to himself with a sickening grin. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I was determined not to let things go his way. Silently, I put away the bank book. Even Jake seemed to sense the tension and suggested I go to bed early, surprisingly offering comforting words. His behavior was unsettling, and I wanted to avoid him, so I went to my room early that night. The next day, an unexpected event shook me. Jake, as usual, left for work after breakfast, but I received a notification that he hadn't shown up at work. This was the first time since we got married that he had missed work. I panicked, worried that he might have been in an accident, and I frantically tried calling him, but his phone was unreachable. Searching around the house, I found a piece of paper on the table. It was a completed divorce notice signed by Jake. I couldn't believe it. Then, I checked the drawer where I had kept my bank book the day before, and it was gone. Everything became clear. Jake hadn't been in an accident or involved in a crime. He had disappeared intentionally. I realized his motive. He likely intended to abandon me and start a new life with my parents' inheritance. Despite feeling shocked and betrayed, I stayed calm. There was no need to panic. I carefully read through the divorce papers and immediately rushed to the city court to handle the legal matters. Jake had brought this upon himself, and I was determined to make him face the consequences of his actions. I also contacted Jake's company to inform them that I hadn't been able to reach him, and his phone wasn't connecting. I apologized for any inconvenience and requested that they let me know as soon as they heard from him. His colleagues were understanding and assured me that they would mark the day as paid leave for him. I was grateful for their support and thought back to when my father had introduced me to this company, hoping it would provide stability. I felt both hurt and determined to confront Jake for his betrayal and irresponsible behavior. After successfully divorcing Jake, I didn't feel instantly liberated from the years of hardship I endured with him. Reflecting on my life, I realized that if I had made this decision sooner, things might have turned out very differently. While packing my belongings at home, my phone rang. It was Jake calling. Despite knowing it was him, I ignored the calls. His persistence continued, even reaching the point of calling the landline. Reluctantly, I answered. "Hello?" I said, trying to remain composed. "Emma, why didn't you answer? You didn't go to work, and your workplace called. You need to contact them right away." Jake's voice sounded frantic. "This isn't the time to discuss that," I replied, but Jake seemed too agitated to listen. In a panicked voice, Jake then confessed, "I can't withdraw money from my mother's bank book." I couldn't help but laugh at his realization. "Did you just realize that now?" I quipped, holding back my amusement. It seemed Jake hadn't noticed earlier since he hastily stole the bank book and ran off. "Well, of course. You burned it the other day, remember?" I reminded him, trying to contain my laughter. "What? Didn't you know I put it in the bag for my pottery class?" I continued, chuckling. I could sense Jake's confusion and panic on the other end of the line. He seemed completely flustered. "And what about this bank book? You burned your mother's bank book with no money in it," Jake explained. "I don't know. After my mother-in-law passed away, I repeatedly asked you to handle the paperwork," I replied, realizing the irony of the situation. Despite the chaos, I felt a sense of relief and even amusement at Jake's predicament. This phone call highlighted the absurdity of our past struggles together. After Jake's frantic call about the bank book, I went to the bank and learned that nothing could be done because I was not listed on the account. The bank book, which only had a few dollars in it, remained untouched where I had left it. Jake continued to blame me, saying I should have handled his mother's affairs properly. Frustrated, I cut him off, telling him there was nothing he could do with the bank book unless he handled the necessary procedures himself. Jake then went back to the bank counter, attempting to explain the situation while I was still on the line. The bank clerk's voice came through faintly, and I caught a crucial part of their conversation. The clerk telling Jake that they couldn't assist him because we were now strangers due to our divorce. "What are you talking about, Jake? We're strangers now. There's no way you can handle the procedures," I interjected, seizing the moment to make it clear that our divorce was finalized and I was no longer involved. I imagined Jake's shocked or angry reaction as I ended the call abruptly. Satisfied with my parting words, I quickly packed my belongings and left the house I had lived in for many years. I headed to my parents' vacant house, which I was set to inherit. My mother, who ran a company, had amassed assets totaling over $8 million. This inheritance represented a new beginning for me after finally breaking free from the challenges I faced with Jake. After inheriting around $600,000 for living expenses and managing the family home, which was filled with sentimental items like my mother's dresses and my father's antiques, I felt a sense of relief. My brother William, who had married and had children, took over the family company. We agreed that I would manage the family home while he received the cash inheritance, and this arrangement went smoothly without any disputes. Once I safely arrived at my family home, I informed my brother about the divorce and my move. He expressed relief, understanding that I needed to move on from my marriage. "Why are you okay with that?" William asked. "Since we couldn't have children and both our parents have passed away, it feels like the right choice. I can finally live my own life without regrets," I explained. William seemed concerned about me being alone, but I reassured him that being divorced and living in our beloved family home brought me the greatest happiness. After that, Jake called me several times on my cell phone, but he never seemed to realize that I was at my parents' home, so he never came over. I enjoyed my alone time, although the house felt a bit lonely without family around. Living in the cherished house where I grew up before marriage gave me a sense of peace and contentment as I embraced this new chapter of my life. Feeling the need to make a bank transfer but realizing I needed the bank book from Jake, I reluctantly went back to our former house. I planned to retrieve it early in the morning while Jake was likely still asleep. However, upon entering, I was hit with the smell of alcohol coming from an open door. I followed the scent to find empty beer cans scattered everywhere in the living room. Shockingly, the bank book I needed was stained and ruined, likely by spilled alcohol. I couldn't believe someone would treat another person's belongings this way, no matter how desperate they might be. I quickly gathered the torn bank book, stuffed it into my bag along with a few personal items, and left. With the damaged bank book, I headed to the bank to complete the transfer. As I approached the entrance, Jake unexpectedly called out to me, "Emma." I turned to see Jake, who had been waiting for me. "I noticed the bank book was gone, so I figured you'd be here," Jake said casually. "What does that have to do with you?" I replied coldly, trying to keep my distance. Ignoring my response, Jake followed me into the bank, staying by my side the entire time. Then, unexpectedly, someone called out to us, "Jake, Emma." It was Jake's younger brother, Robert. His presence was unexpected and surprising since we had mostly cut ties with him over the 40 years of our marriage, only seeing him at funerals. Robert explained that he came for their mother's inheritance and was about to contact Jake after receiving the funds. Jake seemed intrigued by this news, which surprised me. I had assumed their mother's inheritance was relatively small. The encounter was unexpected and added another layer of complexity to the situation, leaving me feeling unsettled as I completed the bank transfer. According to Robert, there were investment trusts and a safety deposit box that his father, my late father-in-law, had rented. Robert had learned about this from his mother before they became estranged. Before she passed away, she asked Robert to handle these matters if necessary, as he had been too busy until now to take care of it. Robert explained to us that in the safety deposit box, along with some jewels, there was a letter. Their mother had stated in the letter that she was leaving all her inheritance to me, Emma. This news shocked me deeply, and Jake appeared even more stunned. Ignoring our reactions, Robert produced the letter from a folder of legal documents. I recognized the envelope. It was one I had bought for her some time ago. On it, in shaky handwriting, was written that all the jewels and assets in the safe deposit box would be inherited by her daughter-in-law, Emma. It was clearly written in my mother-in-law's handwriting. I couldn't help but cover my mouth in disbelief. It seemed she had intended for me to inherit her assets all along, apologizing for her past behavior towards me. Looking at Jake's face, I could see he was shaking with rage. He seemed unable to process this information. Robert, unaware of our divorce, continued, suggesting that I should complete the procedures to officially inherit the assets since I was named as the heir in the letter. He assumed there wouldn't be any issues since I was now the recognized heir. After reissuing the bank book and completing all the necessary procedures, I bid them farewell and left. Later, I received a call from Robert informing me that Jake was causing a fuss, claiming the letter was invalid. This unexpected turn of events added more tension and confusion to the situation, leaving me unsure of what would happen next with my inheritance and my relationship with Jake. It seemed that Jake eventually agreed to follow the wishes outlined in the letter from my mother-in-law after consulting with a lawyer, even though the letter wasn't a formal will. He reluctantly gave up on claiming the house, realizing that the investment trust was tied up in legal matters. Jake then approached me at my parents' house, expressing regret and a desire to start over. However, I firmly reminded him that there was never any love between us and questioned what he truly wanted by suggesting starting over. For the first time, I spoke my mind and expressed what I had been holding back for so long. Jake, unable to respond, remained silent, seemingly regretful. I couldn't help but remark, "At least you were able to inherit the house, huh? By the way, did you contact your company? If you need money that badly, work hard and make sure you don't lose your job." With that, I closed the door, signaling the end of our relationship. In my bank book, there was an inheritance left to me by two mothers, which I believed would allow me to live comfortably until the end. Meanwhile, Jake's despondency led to him forgetting to contact his workplace and getting fired. Reflecting on Jake's situation, I realized that perhaps acting superior to me and maintaining his dignity were the only things motivating him at work. Now that I was gone and there was no hope for the inheritance, he likely felt lost. After spending 40 years together, I felt some concern about Jake's future despite our strained relationship. However, I was determined to move forward and embrace the new chapter of my life with the inheritance left to me. After everything settled down, Robert apologized for the trouble caused by his family and encouraged me to cut ties with Jake completely. Robert had realized from a young age that his family was dysfunctional, so he had chosen to leave home early and live a happier life away from them. Meanwhile, Jake had become reclusive, but should be able to manage with his pension. I decided to return to my pottery class and was warmly welcomed by my friends there. I discovered that enjoying my life without worries could be incredibly fulfilling and fun. During this time, I also had a wonderful encounter at the pottery class. While I used to think I would never marry again, I now believe that spending time with someone who loves you could bring more happiness than being alone forever. I learned through my divorce that it's never too late to find happiness or pursue new experiences in life. There's no such thing as being too late for anything. I believe that regardless of age, one can always find happiness and fulfillment if they remain open to new opportunities and embrace life's possibilities.